Welcome to Automation Unscripted, an educational, frank, and fun podcast dedicated to the art of business process automation. Automation Unscripted is brought to you by Virtual Operations, a leading consultancy in digital transformation, with more than a decade's experience working with organizations to help them grow their return on investment in automation.
Welcome back to another episode of Automation Unscripted. Today, myself, Dan Andrews and Kieran Gilmurray are going to talk about everything to do with citizen innovation. A couple topics we're going to cover today. What is citizen development, the differences between a development team and a CitDev team, looking at some dev skills and dev focus, why is a CitDev program important, and how can organizations benefit? And then we're going to look at some of the main challenges within a CitDev program. And if we have time at the end, we're going to list out and talk about a case study which is specific to citizen development. Now, Kieran, when we first spoke about this, you got me to change citizen development into citizen innovation. You want to talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, look, so let's jump back a little bit. So when we talked about RPA, or intelligent automation, back in the day, which is about 8 or 10 years ago, we talked about citizen developers. In other words, people who didn't follow a traditional IT software engineering degree, getting their hands on low-code tooling and technology like UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, or a host of other tools to allow them to code and connect applications together to allow businesses to operate that little bit more efficiently. I always felt that was a very narrow definition, despite the fact that the tools have increased in power. But I talk about citizen innovation because if you're to digitally transform an organization, then you can't, as a CEO, CFO, or executive board, chuck IT tools at the IT team and say, digitally transform me and we'll see you in a couple of years' time. You have to get everyone involved in the program. When we had citizen developers who were RPA or IA only, the only thing they looked at was processes. They understood to a degree what they were, but then required people in the business to help them, or they hired BAs or whatever else. My definition's broader because I'm saying, right, that's not enough because you don't understand the business. There's a lot more roles than developers in an automation and innovation team, and therefore change the title to citizen innovation because you should have developers, you should have evangelists, you should have process owners, you should have business designers, and a whole host of other roles in the development team alone. And then wider to that, everybody needs to be using digital tools from the top of the organization to the bottom. So I'm moving beyond RPA and IA to say, well, if I'm in the software engineering team, great, those work. If I'm in the social media team, well, I need stuff like ChatGPT, Veed.io, StreamYard to record. I go on to Buzzsprout and I want Copilot. There's a whole host of other things and tools that I want to allow me to be more digital in my role. So citizen innovation, a much broader term that talks about all of the digital tools that everyone uses to allow them to perform their job in a lot more digital way. That I much prefer.
I like it. It's definitely going to take me some time to switch my verbiage. I'm going to get mixed up, I'm sure, in this conversation a number of times. So why don't we first focus on then what definition of what CitDev is? And this can be fairly broad, or citizen innovation. Again, there we go, first time. And now one of the primary reasons intelligent automation tools were created was to give non-technical resources the ability, obviously with a lot of help, to develop and automate processes and areas within their business. These are user-friendly platforms, often require little to no coding, and they allow business users to automate routine tasks and processes. Now, the CitDev program can be, for an organization, a fantastic lever to pull that enables automation to proliferate throughout an organization. And that, for me, is the key point here, whether we're talking about particular tools or rather, as you said earlier, broad spectrum citizen innovation, all low-code tools. I think the same applies.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is a fantastic lever, subject to, Dan, and you and I had this conversation when we were preparing for the podcast. Not everyone can play the piano. Trust me, you would not want to hear me ruining a good piano in any shape, form, or other. Therefore, not everyone can be, in my head, a citizen developer, but a lot of people can be citizen innovators because you can have different skills with different people helping digitally transform.
Yeah, agreed. And funny that you said lever. I said lever, didn't I? I've been in America too long, I think.
Tomato, tomato.
I've been in the US far too long. That's what a decade will do to you. So why don't we look at, because when I was putting some of this together, I was looking at the differences between a development team and a sit dev team. So for our listeners, let's go in a little bit about some of those differences. So why don't we first look at a citizen developer or citizen innovator? Let's first look at their basic skills. And this is really high level, right? So we've only put 2 or 3 areas to discuss here. First of all, is their business expertise from a citizen innovator. So this is someone who functions within a certain business unit or team that has been trained and armed with the ability to automate processes. These sort of tools will be low code or no code tools, and that individual will have the specific process knowledge and know exactly what they want to automate because they sit in that part of the business function.
And that's the power, isn't it, Dan? That last statement alone, giving them tools to manipulate what they know deeply and intimately because they're engaged in that business function every day.
100%. And with those skills, what their focus is that their goal is to focus on simple automations with repetitive tasks, automations that can be deployed rapidly. And the whole goal is the empowerment of those individuals to go away, find processes, see problems, not just within themselves, but amongst or along many different business users, giving them that power to then automate those processes.
Yeah, and it is that, isn't it? More people and more people coming into work today are a lot more digital. Therefore, they expect these tools as well and expect things that allow them to actually transform their own work without going to the back of an IT queue.
Yeah, and then if we contrast that to a development team, so this would be a specialist team that you've brought in, could be over a variety of tools. So their skill sets would be, they'd be technical experts in those tools, and they likely would have or be proficient in programming skills, whatever programming language that tool is working with. They have the ability to write certain pieces of code in order to manipulate that tool, and they'll be able to do things that the citizen developers just won't be able to because they don't have that technical background. So they'll be advanced in those intelligent automation tools.
Yeah, and that is the difference, isn't it? We're talking about what we would describe as traditional and non-traditional coders here. So these individuals we would expect to have done a formal education or courses in software engineering, software development. That way there, as you mentioned, they have got the programming skills. It's not just the programming skills as well. It's the knowledge of data security, data privacy. It's the knowledge of cybersecurity and all the things that come with a formal education in IT or in IT-related subjects that develop a wider technical expertise to allow them to develop, more complex automation than might a citizen developer, to start to use all of their skills to create integrations between multiple systems and then have the ability to maintain and support the automations that they have built that would be too complex, too convoluted, too involved, too technical for what might be considered a business or citizen developer who hasn't had that depth of experience.
Yeah, and it's really good to differentiate those two because it enables people to see, like, hey, if I have these complex automations covering 10 systems, likely I need an experienced developer or team of developers who can handle that. But for SitDev, when we look at those type of automations, those really are those simple automations that interact with maybe 1 or 2 systems, maybe more, but really enable that individual to get hands-on experience with those tools whilst not going into an incredible amount of depth like those dev teams will be.
Absolutely agree. And again, it's getting access to those automations the dev team probably wouldn't even touch because they may, in their mix or big bag or work stack, they may fall too far down the spectrum to actually get attention. So lots of good reasons, lots of differentiations between the two camps.
Yeah, why don't we come on to next why a citizen innovation program is important and how organizations can benefit. We talked about pulling that lever and it being a great opportunity for businesses to have automation throughout their entire company. So let's talk about some of those reasons why, right? The first one for me would be, and again, not an exhaustive list, but some of the key points here. So the first one for me is enablement, and we talked a little bit on this. It allows individuals with little to no tech background to create their own automations, and it enables those people in all over, so spread out all over the organization. And that's the key point, that it allows automation to become fully part of the entire organization, as opposed to just specific areas that, say, the COE may be focusing on.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, second one for me is efficiency. So citizen developer team will be working on those processes within their business function that they intimately know that an IT team might not. That, if they're able to do that at the immediately, leads to much faster deployments of those automations under obviously controlled circumstances, because we're not talking about here creating citizen dentists who are going to work on the primary arterial systems of your businesses yet. It also allows automated processes to happen within functions, which means that those individuals themselves are not doing mundane routine work that puts them off and maybe encourages them to leave the organization, but frees them up to focus on higher value activities that result in much greater and better business outcomes.
100%. The next one for me would be cost savings. This is more bottom line we're talking about. It can reduce the cost of hiring those specialized IPA teams, right? Intelligent automation teams. And for those less complex automations, the last thing you want to be doing as an organization is have this all singing, all dancing automation team focusing on a project that could have been handled by the citizen developers.
Yeah, you want to put the right thing to the right individual. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to get the CFO to do basic financial accounting. Everybody has their role and their function and their cost, and therefore if you can execute and optimize your resources, then you're going to end up a much more efficient, cost-effective operation.
The next one then would be scalability. So, and again, some of these overlap. You have the ability to automate across business functions, and it becomes much more feasible when you're running a SIT dev program, because you really can embed that within all the different functions within that business.
Yeah, I really like that one, actually, because again, it goes back to my earlier comment. You can't chuck digital transformation across to a very small number in an IT team and expect it to happen. It just doesn't. And therefore, scaling citizen innovation across the enterprise leads you to a much greater possibility of continually digitally transforming as time moves by, which leads me to the next one, Dan, which for me is innovation. So how do you actually encourage innovation across the business? And you do that by allowing every individual in all areas to implement automation or digital solutions using those low-code tools to allow the business itself to culturally, physically, technologically, and every other way digitally transform to allow you to perform in the modern age.
Yeah, and I think innovation is key here, and some of it's also about excitement, right? You talked previously about those individuals doing those mundane tasks, maybe looking at leaving an organization, giving them the ability to actually automate those tasks for themselves and for maybe their whole team. Bit of a game changer. And if you can get people excited about that and also understanding those tools that can achieve that, that can be fantastic for you as an organization. And
motivational for the individuals as well, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. There's another one as well as IT collaboration. Now, this one's interesting because the SIT Dev program really does encourage collaboration with IT or the COE, as they'll be handling a lot of the governance support and maybe those integration capabilities that the SIT Devs can't handle. And this meshing of the two teams is really important for the success of this type of program.
Or it should. You and I know some IT teams that push back against that collaboration, believing that IT can only be done by an IT professional. That, I think, is thinking that needs to be consigned to the dustbin of time. Otherwise, businesses will not succeed, nor will IT be seen as an enabler. Because ultimately, what we're talking about, Dan, by enabling citizen innovation, by encouraging collaboration, by implementing those cost savings and the efficiencies and enabling people to take control of their own work and their own business function, is to create a competitive advantage. That's why we're existing. If we do all of the above and bring to bear all of the advantages of a citizen developer program, which we are assuming will be ran well, then that will provide a company with a digital automation, AI, whatever competitive advantage you've got collectively put together to deliver an amazing business at relatively low cost compared to a very analog business where nobody is particularly motivated to come in and crunch numbers using an abacus.
Yeah, and the competitive advantage piece completely relies on obviously the success of that SitDev program, and the success again relies on that excitement factor and enabling those individuals to be able to go and automate those processes.
100%. And we're not saying this is easy either, are we? Because there are challenges with citizen developer programs.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple. I've named 5 here. First one would be the skill gap, training and funding. There really is a significant training requirement to get these individuals up and running, but like anything, in my opinion, the juice is worth the squeeze if you can get that excitement factor there and you can really get it amongst all business functions, then that is worth the investment. The second one is then ongoing support, which same as a standard automation or a standard process, everyone seems to forget about support. It's no different with the SitDev program. You need to have a very well-established support team and a support function to make sure that these processes are running as they expect, and that comes with investment and funding.
It does, and businesses just need to put that in place and recognize that up from the front. The second one for me, governance, compliance. If you're spreading automation teams across a business, then that opens up the potential to very inconsistent, poorly built, non-compliant, non-standard automations. In other words, everybody handcrafts things in their own way. That can become expensive. The way to manage that is to put a governance and process place where the IT team ultimately design the standards and then probably and likely have teams bringing them the automations, evidencing the code, showing them how it works, making sure it's well annotated, it's secure, and bringing all of the IT competencies and skills that you would expect from a sophisticated team to help the citizen innovators actually implement really robust, secure, scalable code that allows the business to do things to allow them to gain the competitive advantage and perform in their market.
Yeah, I like your terms there of could and may. Obviously, there's no one set way to do it, right? But I think that is, for me, what you just described, how we would attack the problem, right? Governance and compliance coming from IT, COE, those areas, normally that's where we see success.
We should, because we're trying to create a robust methodology. We're trying to put out best practices so that we maintain good quality standards. I go back to my example earlier on. You wouldn't make up HR rules 1,000 times. You wouldn't give 1,000 people 1,000 different ways to do the finance. Why would you do the same thing for code or automations or any type of innovation? There needs to be standards and robust methodologies, but once shared and once followed, that allows things to work really well.
Coming on to the next one then, resource allocation. This one can be a little bit tricky because you're trying to find a good balance between the day-to-day responsibilities that individual has, that citizen innovator, and then the development time and the opportunities that they get. So striking that balance and reaching that equilibrium between the two can be tricky, but if you do get it right, you can see fantastic results. The second one is it can also be challenging and a bit of an overhead and a burden for the COE or IT to do exactly what you talked about, the governance and compliance piece, right? Keeping up with it, implementing it, ensuring that it's dynamic to fit as the citizen innovation program grows. That can become a pretty major overhead.
Yeah, it can, but I suppose, Dan, it goes back to what we're saying earlier on. If I'm one developer and I'm developing an automation, I can get one automation done, whatever it is a day, let's imagine. Whereas if I'm a guide, a mentor, a tutor, and I have 10 citizen innovators beneath me, if I have to do 10 30-minute meetings a day, I'm getting 10 automations done a day. So when it might cost you on the one hand, it certainly, when done right, can benefit you multiple times over on the other hand.
Agreed. And then the final one for me would be change, actually adoption of change. I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but in order for your citizen innovation programs to succeed, you need multiple different business units to be open to and accept the type of the change and widespread adoption of these type of tools. And this is why I sound like a broken record. This needs to be addressed with both education at all levels and building excitement around the potential of what this initiative can do. Those two things together, arming individuals with the tools and then getting them excited about what they could potentially do with it, that for me is the key to success.
Yeah, if there isn't a bright and shiny vision behind it and you just lump citizen developers with more work on top of a very busy day, it's not the most wonderful sales initiative to get them to want to do something to make an impact on their role. Therefore, this has to be an exciting program. This has to be well managed, well governed, well sold, and well supported over the long term. Because as you and I know, it can be hard work developing automations and IT applications, but those are the things you need to do to guarantee some level of success inside of your business. And that, Dan, then moves us on to how do you judge the success criteria of an automation program, and how might we give people an example to tie this all together and illustrate what it is we're talking about.
Yeah, and I put together a pretty basic example of the type of sit dev automation that you might see in a day-to-day. So it's invoice processing within any financial department. So if I run you through the quick business context, one of the finance team will receive vendor invoices, let's say via email. That individual will then manually input the invoice into the company's accounting system, and they'll do that multiple times across maybe multiple individuals. So you can see here that you've got a couple systems and you have something that is low skill, low complexity, and very repetitive.
Yeah, easy followed, very logical. Something that an individual who's in that function probably is looking at every day and tearing their hair out going, my goodness, there has to be a better way. Well, there is. And they can do this, and if you put some clear metrics and KPIs around it, in other words, numbers of automations processed by a robot or digital work or whatever, time saved, then I think those things stack up. And there's more than that. If you look at even within the finance function again, you can use a tool, and this is one example only, Microsoft Power Automate, a low-code, no-code RPA tool. You can have Power Automate monitor a finance department's inbox for incoming invoices. So every time an email comes in with an invoice attachment, usually in a PDF or image, every time you get one, then you can build an automation that uses some AI, and that's already built in using Microsoft AI Power Builder, to extract the relevant data. In other words, stuff like invoice number, date, amount, vendor details, and so on. You can extract the data out of that automation if you want to get a little bit more complicated. Now, some of this may need some support from the coach, the mentor, and the IT team, but you can extract the information out. You can then automatically put it into the company's accounting system through the user interface using digital workers or APIs. And once you've done all that, you can then, following the data entry completion, an automation confirmation email could be sent back out to the vendor acknowledging the receipt of the invoice, and you don't really need a person involved. If you do want to check it, of course, you can put human in the loop stop moments and checks and change balances in there to make sure it works. But all of a sudden, someone who's a finance clerk with very minimal technical knowledge can set up an automation using drag and drop low-code interfaces in Power Automate to quickly deploy a solution without needing to wait on the IT team or the IT and development cycle. And all of a sudden, you've now reduced manual entry, you've minimized errors, and you've freed up time for that clerk to do more interesting and better work, which I'm sure they themselves will be a lot more excited about. And those, Dan, are just tiny examples. And this is where, we've painted a bright and shiny picture. We've called out the risks, and we haven't, described some of our own experiences in this working. But I remember one org I was in, the actual so-called qualified team had delivered about 300 million task automations in numbers of years. And 300 million is a big number, and everybody got excited. The citizen developer program we put into place, which is as described and successfully supported as we were talking about in this podcast or webinar, all of a sudden the citizen developers in 9 months delivered 400 million transactions. So you imagine an IT team, 300 million in a couple of years, citizen innovators, 400 million in 9 months, but the combination of the two gave the organization almost 1 billion automations. Now that's a dramatic number of automations, and that certainly resulted in a huge amount of cost efficiencies within that organization that allowed it to compete a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, and I mean, in that scenario, you can really see how the citizen innovation can proliferate and save so much annually, just through empowering those individuals who you wouldn't have thought would be able, say, a decade ago, to be able to do all those steps we just mentioned in that example, which sounded very technical themselves, with a fair amount of training. I was about to say very little, fair amount of training to be able to achieve it. So I think that's a really good point to end on. Let me just summarize what we've covered so far. So we went through citizen innovation and citizen development. What is actually the citizen innovation program? The differences between a standard dev team and then a citizen innovation team or program. We looked at the why, so why a citizen innovation program is so important and how organizations can benefit. And then we looked at some of the main challenges that you may face, and then a very simple case study to help elaborate and explain the type of processes that a citizen innovator would be working on.
And if I haven't sold it to you by now, you'll never believe it, but this does work. The technology's there, the digital skills and the desire is there inside of an organization. It now comes down to the organization's appetite, Dan, to want to put this in place, fund it, support it, coach and mentor it. And again, as you say, keep a good tight eye on it to make sure that everything works over the long term, so you gain the benefits from all of the investment that you're putting into the people and the tech.
Yeah, and you can just see from this conversation that Kieran and I are very big advocates of citizen innovation, because we've seen what it can do, and it really can transform an organization. And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up, Kieran. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.
See you next time, everyone. Really enjoyed that.